Don't close your eyes, Rosie. Listen to me, Bruno said as the monitor screamed, its sharp rhythm cutting through the antiseptic air while his hand trembled around hers, warm against skin gone frighteningly cold. The lights of the emergency ward were too bright, bleaching color from the world as nurses rushed in, their shoes whispering across polished floors slick with disinfectant. Rose lay still on the gurney, lashes resting like shadows against her cheeks, her breathing shallow and uneven. Bruno walked beside her, refusing to let go, his knuckles white, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The smell of antiseptic burned his nose, a reminder that this was real, too real, and that exhaustion had finally claimed the woman who never allowed herself to stop. Hours earlier, she had laughed backstage, brushing sweat-damp hair from her face, insisting she was fine. Rose always said she was fine. It was her quiet habit, the way she swallowed pain and dressed it as strength. Bruno knew that habit well. He'd seen it in the way she skipped meals, the way her hands shook after long rehearsals, the way her smile stayed bright even when her eyes dulled with fatigue. He had wanted to stop her, to pull her away from the lights and noise and say enough. He hadn't. Now the price of that silence pressed on his chest like a weight. They pushed him back as doctors surrounded her. "Sir, please wait outside." The words were polite but firm. Bruno nodded, stepping away only when forced, his palms still tingling where her warmth had been. The doors swung shut, and the corridor swallowed the sounds inside, leaving him alone with the echo of machines and his own breath. Time stretched. He sat, stood, paced. The hospital smelled of old coffee and clean sheets, of fear masked as routine. Bruno pressed his fingers together, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood, counting beats the way he counted measures in a song. Music had always been his refuge, his way of making sense of chaos. Tonight, it abandoned him. There was no melody for this, no lyric that could steady the panic clawing at his ribs. When the doctor finally came, his expression was calm but serious. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, stress compounded over months. "She needs rest," he said. "Real rest, and someone to make sure she takes it." Bruno exhaled, the breath shuddering out of him. Relief and guilt tangled together until he couldn't tell them apart. He thanked the doctor and followed him into the room where Rose lay asleep now, color slowly returning to her face, chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. Tubes traced quiet paths along her arm. Machines hummed softly, a mechanical lullaby. He pulled a chair close and sat, careful not to wake her. Up close, she looked younger, softer, stripped of the armor she wore on stage. Bruno reached out, brushing his thumb over her knuckles, a touch so light it was almost a promise. He remembered the first time she had let him see her cry, months ago in a darkened studio after a recording session that had gone wrong. She'd apologized for being weak. He had told her she was the strongest person he knew. Tonight, he wondered if strength sometimes meant knowing when to fall. As dawn crept through the narrow window, painting the walls with pale gold, Rose stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then settling on him. Confusion gave way to recognition, and a faint smile curved her lips. "You stayed," she whispered, voice rough. "Always," Bruno said, and the word held everything he couldn't say. Fear, regret, love shaped by quiet moments and unspoken vows. Tears slipped from her eyes, sliding into her hair. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be, just stay, let yourself breathe." He leaned closer, resting his forehead against her hand, feeling her pulse steady beneath his skin. In that simple contact, something shifted. The frantic rush that had driven her for so long eased, replaced by a fragile calm. Days passed in a soft blur. Bruno learned the rhythm of the hospital, the way mornings smelled of toast and disinfectant, the way nights hummed with distant footsteps and whispered conversations. He read to her when she was too tired to talk, sang under his breath when sleep wouldn't come, argued gently when she tried to push herself too soon. Rose, stripped of schedules and expectations, began to confront the fear she'd buried, the terror of stopping, of being left behind if she slowed down. Bruno listened, really listened, his own fears laid bare in the quiet hours. The dread of losing her, the guilt of not protecting her sooner. Recovery was not dramatic. It was made of small victories, a longer walk down the hallway, a laugh that came easily, a meal finished without protest. Each step forward felt earned. And through it all, Bruno remained, a constant presence, his devotion steady and unshowy, built not on grand gestures but on patience. When the doctor finally said she could go home, Rose squeezed Bruno's hand, her grip stronger now. Outside, the world waited, loud and demanding. But for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to run back into it. She leaned into him instead, breathing in the familiar scent of his jacket, grounding herself in the moment. As they stepped into the sunlight together, Bruno glanced at her, memorizing the way she looked when she allowed herself to be human, tired, healing, alive. He knew the road ahead would not be simple. But loyalty, he had learned, wasn't proven in applause or headlines. It was proven in hospital rooms at dawn, in staying when it would be easier to leave, in loving someone enough to ask them to rest. Rose met his gaze and smiled, not the polished smile of the stage, but something quieter and truer. In that smile, Bruno found his answer. Whatever came next, they would face it not in exhaustion or fear, but together, steady and awake, finally listening to the fragile rhythm of their own hearts. The argument exploded in the car before the hospital gates disappeared behind them, Rose's voice sharp with frustration, Bruno's hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only solid thing left in a world that refused to slow down. "You can't cancel everything," Rose said, her tone brittle, eyes fixed on the city sliding past the window. "People are waiting, contracts are signed. Do you know how many people depend on me?" Bruno laughed once, short and humorless. "And what about you? Who depends on you being alive, Rose?" He glanced at her, jaw tight. "Because I do, and I'm not watching you collapse again just to keep everyone else comfortable." The words hit harder than he intended. Rose flinched, then turned toward him, fire flaring in her gaze. "Don't turn this into guilt. I didn't ask you to stay. I didn't ask you to put your life on hold." "You didn't have to," he shot back. "I stayed because I chose to, because watching you destroy yourself was worse than any headline." Silence slammed between them, thick and suffocating. The car filled with the low hum of traffic and the echo of everything they had never said out loud. Rose folded her arms, a defensive gesture she didn't even realize she was making. Exhaustion still clung to her, not just in her body, but in the way her shoulders sagged, the way her anger seemed fueled by fear more than pride. When they reached her apartment, paparazzi flashes erupted like gunfire. Bruno swore under his breath, stepping out first, blocking cameras with his body as he ushered her inside. Shouts followed them, questions sharp and invasive, rumors already forming in the air. "Is it true you collapsed? Are you quitting? Is Bruno Mars the reason you're canceling your tour?" The door slammed shut, cutting off the noise, but the damage lingered. Rose leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing shallow. "This is exactly what I'm afraid of," she whispered. "They're already rewriting my life." Bruno softened, crossing the room in 2 strides. "Let them talk. They don't get to decide what breaks you." He reached for her, hesitated, then rested his hands on her shoulders. The contact was electric, familiar and dangerous all at once. "You don't have to prove anything anymore." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "You say that because you don't know what it's like to feel disposable. To think that if you stop, even for a second, someone else will take your place." His expression darkened. "You think I don't know that fear?" His voice dropped raw. "Every stage, every album, I feel it. The difference is I don't let it eat me alive." The room felt too small, charged with unspoken truths. Rose pulled away, packing. "I built my life on momentum. Rest feels like failure." Bruno watched her, heart aching. "And collapse feels like success." He exhaled slowly. "Look at me." When she finally stopped, he stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking you to survive." The confession cracked something open. Rose's eyes filled, anger dissolving into something softer, more terrifying. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice barely audible. "If I stop, I'll hear everything I've been running from." Bruno reached out again. This time she didn't pull away. He drew her into him, holding her as her breath hitched against his chest. Outside, the world buzzed with speculation and noise, but inside there was only the sound of her breathing and his heart pounding, steady and protective. Days later, the controversy exploded. Headlines accused Bruno of control, of forcing Rose into hiding. Fans split into camps, social media igniting with blame and conspiracy. Rose stared at her phone, hands shaking, rage and hurt mixing in equal measure. "They think you're my jailer," she said bitterly. "They think I'm weak." Bruno took the phone from her gently and set it aside. "They think whatever keeps them entertained." He cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. "I know who you are, and you're not weak." She searched his eyes, finding no doubt there, only unwavering certainty. It scared her more than the accusations. Trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risking everything she'd built. But exhaustion had stripped her down to honesty. That night they sat on the floor, backs against the couch, sharing memories like confessions. Rose spoke of nights she'd cried alone after performances, of the pressure to be perfect. Bruno admitted the loneliness of fame, the way applause faded too quickly, leaving silence that screamed. Their words tangled together, heated at times, tender at others, raw and unfiltered. "You drive me insane," Rose muttered, half smiling through tears. Bruno smirked. "Good, means you're still fighting." As dawn crept through the windows, painting the room in soft gray light, something shifted between them. Not resolution, not peace, but understanding, fragile and hard one. The world outside was still loud, still judgmental, still hungry for spectacle. Inside, Rose rested her head on Bruno's shoulder, eyes closing, finally allowing herself to be still. He wrapped an arm around her, gaze fixed on the quiet city, knowing the storm wasn't over. But for the first time since the hospital, they weren't running from it. They were standing in its center together, breathing through the tension, daring to believe that choosing rest, choosing each other, might be the most controversial act of all. The knock came at midnight, sharp and insistent, slicing through the fragile calm they had built, and Rose felt her chest tighten before Bruno even reached the door. "Don't open it," she said instinctively, her fingers curling into the fabric of his sleeve. Bruno paused, listening. Another knock, louder this time, followed by a voice that carried authority and irritation. "Management, we need to talk, now." Rose's jaw clenched. The past few days had been a blur of accusations and speculation, but this felt like judgment arriving in person. Bruno opened the door anyway, his posture immediately shifting into something solid and unyielding. Two people stood outside, faces polite but eyes sharp. Contracts, obligations, numbers spoken like weapons. They stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, filling the room with pressure. Rose remained seated, back straight, hands trembling in her lap. "You can't disappear like this," one of them said, voice smooth and cold. "Your image is at risk. The narrative is slipping." Bruno laughed quietly. "She's not a narrative, she's a person." Rose stood then, surprising even herself. "I collapsed," she said, her voice steady despite the fear thrumming through her. "I was hospitalized, and you're worried about perception." The room went still. One of them sighed. "We're worried about the future." "So am I," Rose shot back, heat rising. "And my future doesn't include killing myself to keep schedules intact." The words hung heavy, undeniable. Bruno felt pride and fear crash together as he watched her reclaim ground she'd never allowed herself before. But resistance came with consequences, and they were spelled out quickly: penalties, lawsuits, silent threats disguised as concern. After they left, the apartment felt hollow, as if the walls themselves were listening. Rose sank onto the couch, hands shaking now that adrenaline drained away. "They'll ruin me," she whispered. "If I don't comply, they'll make sure no one forgets it." Bruno crouched in front of her, taking her hands. "They don't get to decide your worth, and they don't scare me." She looked at him, eyes shining with something dangerously close to panic. "But what if they scare me?" Her voice broke. "What if I lose everything?" "You won't," he said firmly. "Not if I can help it." The next morning detonated online. A leaked audio clip, her voice, strained, talking about exhaustion, spun into headlines about instability. Rose stared at the screen, numb, betrayal cutting deeper than any accusation. "They promised confidentiality," she said hollowly. Bruno's face darkened. "They crossed a line." The calls started immediately. Advisors urging silence, friends choosing sides, even strangers offering opinions like verdicts. Rose snapped, anger finally overpowering fear. She grabbed her phone, thumb hovering over the camera icon. "Don't," Bruno said quietly, instinct warning him. "I have to," she replied, tears streaking down her face. "I'm done letting them speak for me." She went live without makeup, hair undone, eyes red but fierce. Bruno watched from the side, heart pounding as she spoke, about collapse, about pressure, about the lie of endless strength. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "I'm tired," she said, "and I'm choosing to rest. If that disappoints you, I'm sorry, but I choose to live." The backlash was immediate and violent, praise and hatred colliding in real time. Rose ended the stream and sagged, breath ragged. Bruno caught her before she fell, holding her as sobs tore free, raw and unfiltered. "You just set fire to everything," he murmured, half in awe, half in fear. She laughed through tears. "I know." That night, tension bled into something else, an intensity sharpened by truth. Words turned heated, confessions spilling too fast. Rose accused him of being too willing to sacrifice himself. Bruno accused her of hiding behind duty to avoid vulnerability. Their voices rose, clashing, until suddenly they were inches apart, breaths mingling, anger and desire blurring into something dangerous. "Why do you stay?" she demanded. "Why fight battles that aren't yours?" "Because you are," he said, voice low and fierce. "Because loving you isn't convenient, it's a choice." The silence that followed was electric. Rose reached for him first, fingers trembling as they gripped his shirt, grounding herself in the reality of him. The kiss that followed was not gentle. It was desperate, charged with fear and relief and everything unsaid, a collision of two people refusing to lose each other to the noise. Later, as they lay tangled together, the city humming beyond the windows, Rose traced circles on his chest, calmer now but still fragile. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. Bruno kissed her hair. "Neither do I, but whatever it is, we face it awake, together." Outside, the world continued to argue, to judge, to demand. Inside, Rose finally slept without guilt, and Bruno stayed awake, watching over her, knowing the storm was far from over, but also knowing that the most dangerous battles had already begun, not with the world, but within themselves, and for the first time they were fighting them side by side. The morning after the live stream arrived like a reckoning, sunlight spilling through the curtains with cruel normalcy, while the world outside their apartment burned louder than ever. Rose woke to the vibration of her phone rattling on the table, notifications stacking faster than she could read them. Bruno was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, shoulders tense, scrolling through headlines with a jaw set hard enough to crack. The air smelled of cold coffee and sleeplessness. "Say it," Rose whispered, already bracing herself. Bruno didn't look at her. "They're calling it a meltdown. Half of them are praising your honesty. The other half think you're unstable and that I'm manipulating you." She let out a sharp laugh that turned into a cough. "Of course they do." When she reached for the phone, Bruno caught her wrist gently but firmly. "Not yet. Let me be the shield for a minute." Her eyes flashed. "I don't need a shield, I need control." "That's the thing," he shot back, finally meeting her gaze. "You've been confusing control with survival, and it nearly killed you." The words landed like a slap. Rose sat up, anger flaring. "Don't talk to me like I'm fragile." "I'm talking to you like you matter," Bruno said, voice rising despite himself. "And if that makes you uncomfortable, good, because pretending you're invincible is what got us here." Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. Rose's hands curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. "You think I don't know that?" she snapped. "You think I don't replay that moment in the hospital every time I close my eyes?" Bruno stood abruptly, packing. "Then why do you keep running back into the fire?" "Because standing still terrifies me," she shouted. "Because if I stop moving, I hear all the voices telling me I'm not enough." Bruno stopped packing. His voice dropped, raw and exposed. "I hear those voices too. The difference is I don't let them decide whether I deserve to live." The argument burned hot and fast, words colliding, wounds reopening. But beneath the anger was something sharper, truth cutting away the lies they'd used to survive. Rose's breath hitched, tears blurring her vision. "You don't understand what they can take from me," she said quietly. "They can erase me." Bruno stepped closer. "And you don't understand what losing you would take from me." The confession cracked the room open. Rose looked at him as if seeing him clearly for the first time, not as a protector or a partner in chaos, but as a man who was afraid, terrified of a world without her in it. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. They froze. Another ring followed, longer this time. Bruno glanced through the peephole and swore under his breath. "Press." Rose's stomach dropped. "I'm not dressed for this." "Doesn't matter," Bruno said, already opening the door. The questions came like bullets, cameras shoved forward, accusations thinly veiled as concern. "Rose, are you being forced to step back? Bruno, are you controlling her decisions? Is this relationship damaging your career?" Rose felt something snap. She stepped forward past Bruno, straight into the flashing lights. "Stop," she said, her voice calm in a way that scared even herself. "All of you, stop pretending you care about me." The hallway fell silent. "I collapsed because I pushed myself beyond human limits," she continued. "Not because of him, not because of love, but because I was taught that rest is weakness." Bruno watched her, heart pounding, pride and fear warring inside him. "And if standing beside someone who refuses to let me destroy myself costs me roles, contracts, or applause," Rose said, eyes blazing, "then that's a price I'm willing to pay." A reporter scoffed. "So you're choosing him over your career?" Rose didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing myself. He just happens to be standing with me." The door slammed shut moments later, cutting off the noise, but the impact lingered. Rose leaned against the wall, breath shaking. Bruno crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "That was explosive," he murmured into her hair. She laughed weakly. "I'm done being polite." The fallout was immediate and brutal. Endorsements were paused, meetings canceled. Friends went quiet. Others emerged unexpectedly, offering support from places Rose never thought to look. The world fractured into extremes, and there was no hiding from it. That night, tension flared again, but differently this time. Less defensive, more honest. Rose confronted Bruno about his own sacrifices, the tour he postponed, the risks he took for her. "You don't get to disappear for me," she said fiercely. "I won't be another reason you burn out." He stepped closer, eyes intense. "I'm not disappearing, I'm choosing." "Then choose yourself too," she demanded. Their argument turned heated, voices low but sharp, emotions stripped bare. They stood inches apart, breathing each other in, anger and care tangled so tightly it was impossible to separate them. "I'm scared," Bruno admitted finally. "Every time you close your eyes, I think about that monitor." Rose's expression softened, guilt flickering. "I don't want to be your fear." "You're not," he said. "You're my reason." The kiss that followed was slower this time, deeper, heavy with understanding rather than desperation. It tasted like resolve, like something forged under pressure rather than impulse. Later, curled together in the quiet, Rose stared at the ceiling, thoughts racing. "Everything's changed," she said softly. Bruno traced idle patterns on her arm. "Good, it needed to." She turned toward him, eyes steady now, no longer running. "If I walk away from parts of this life, will you still want me?" He didn't hesitate. "I want the version of you that gets to breathe. Fame was never the reason." Rose closed her eyes, letting the words sink in, knowing there was no undoing what she'd started. The world outside would keep pushing, judging, demanding explanations. But inside that room, something rare had formed. Not certainty, not safety, but a fierce, honest commitment to stop surviving and start living, no matter how loud the consequences became. The first invitation arrived wrapped in velvet words and poisoned intent, an exclusive interview pitched as a chance to tell your truth. And Rose knew the moment Bruno read it aloud that nothing about it was honest. "They want a spectacle," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor, fingers tapping a restless rhythm against her knee. "They want tears. They want me to crack." Bruno folded the paper slowly, his expression unreadable. "They want a villain," he replied, "and they'll decide which one of us it is before the cameras even roll." Rose looked up at him, eyes sharp. "Then why does part of me want to go?" "Because you're tired of being spoken for," he said immediately. "And because you've always believed that if you just explain yourself well enough, people will listen." She laughed, bitter and soft at the same time. "I hate that you know me like that." He sat across from her, close enough that their knees touched. "I hate that it almost killed you." The tension between them was constant now, no longer just fear or anger, but something heavier, the pressure of decisions that couldn't be undone. Rose had begun sleeping through the night again, but her dreams were vivid, crowded with stage lights and silent audiences turning away. Bruno noticed the way she sometimes startled awake, breath shallow, and how she hid it behind sarcasm the next morning. When she finally agreed to the interview, the fight was explosive. "I'm not hiding," Rose snapped. "I won't live like I've done something wrong." Bruno's voice was controlled but edged with steel. "You're not wrong. You're vulnerable, and there are people who make a living off tearing that apart." "You don't trust me to handle it," she accused. "I don't trust them," he shot back. "And I don't trust you when you think pain makes you stronger." The words hit deep. Rose stood, face flushed, emotions boiling over. "Stop trying to save me like I'm a project." Bruno rose too, matching her intensity. "Stop pretending you don't need saving sometimes." The silence that followed was volcanic. Rose turned away, chest heaving, then spoke so quietly it hurt. "If I don't speak now, they'll decide the story forever." Bruno closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "Then I'll be there, every second, and if they twist your words, I'll burn the room down with the truth." The studio was colder than it looked on screen, lights glaring, makeup heavy on Rose's skin. Bruno sat just out of frame, watching her hands clasp and unclasp, the old anxiety humming beneath her calm exterior. The interviewer smiled too easily, questions sharp beneath their polished surface. "You've stepped back from your career," the interviewer said. "Some say you've lost your edge." Rose inhaled slowly. "I didn't lose my edge, I lost my fear of rest." A murmur rippled through the room. "And Bruno," the interviewer continued, "is he a support system or a distraction?" Rose's eyes flicked briefly to Bruno, then back to the camera. "He's the reason I didn't die trying to be perfect." The room froze. Bruno's breath caught, emotions slamming into him unprepared. The questions grew more aggressive. Was she unstable? Was she afraid of fading relevance? Did she resent the pressure of success? Rose answered without flinching, voice steady but raw, each word stripping away years of carefully curated illusion. When the interviewer finally asked, "If your career never recovers, will it have been worth it?" Rose didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, "because I finally recovered." The fallout was immediate and ferocious. Some hailed her as brave. Others mocked her vulnerability, dissected her expressions frame by frame. A sponsor officially withdrew that same night. Rose read the email in silence, then handed the phone to Bruno. "There it is," she said, "the cost." Bruno stared at the screen, then set it aside. "We'll survive." She looked at him, eyes searching. "What if I don't want to fight anymore?" He stepped closer, voice low. "Then don't, rest. I'll fight if you need me to." The argument that followed wasn't loud. It was worse, quiet, surgical, every word exposing a nerve. Rose accused him of being too ready to sacrifice. Bruno accused her of equating punishment with purpose. Tears came, not explosive, but steady and relentless. "I don't want to be strong all the time," she whispered. "I want to be allowed to fall apart." Bruno pulled her into him, forehead resting against hers. "Then fall, I've got you." The night deepened, the city alive with opinions that no longer defined them. Wrapped in the dim light of the apartment, Rose finally let herself break without apology, sobs shaking her frame. Bruno held her through it all, not fixing, not soothing, just staying. By morning, something had settled, Not certainty, not victory, but resolve. Rose stood by the window, watching the sun rise over a life that looked nothing like the one she'd planned. "I don't know who I am without the noise," she said. Bruno joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "Then let's meet that version slowly." She squeezed his hand, a small, fierce smile breaking through the exhaustion. Outside, the world would keep demanding explanations, apologies, performances. Inside, Rose chose something quieter and far more radical, healing without permission, and Bruno chose, again, to stand beside her, not as a savior, not as a shadow, but as a witness to the hardest truth they were learning to live with. Love doesn't fix the storm, but it can teach you how to stay standing when everything else falls away.